Last year marked the 50th anniversary of a new voice on radio in Boston, the combination of music, politically charged commentary, and mishegas on the FM station WBCN. The station was a game changer for many baby boomers in Boston whose lives were changed by a new kind of rock and roll. It's all chronicled in a documentary film, WBCN and the American Revolution. We're talking with the director, Bill Lichtenstein. Thank you very much for being with us, Bill.
Sure, thank you.
Bill, I want to ask you, how did you get started? Because you used to work at BCN, so how did that come about?
I started at the impossibly young age of 14. I started volunteering by answering what was called the listener line. It was a phone line where listeners were told to call and ask anything, and they need a ride someplace, and then from there started doing news reporting and ended up with my own weekly radio show.
Now, you started as a reporter, and I guess I read elsewhere that this happened almost by accident. One day somebody just told you to go out and record something?
Yeah, I was answering the listener line and had finished my shift, and Danny Schechter, who was the
political reporter and commentator.
Commentator who called himself the news dissector, was the sole news person in the station. And there was a demonstration up the street from the station at the main Boston Police Headquarters over the killing of a Black Panther, Fred Hampton. And he handed me a tape recorder and said, "Here, do me a favor. Go up the street, push the red button, and ask people, why are you here?" Which, of course, is the perfect question for a 14-year-old. And I brought the tape back, and then he showed me how to cut it and listen to it and find, parts that were the usable parts, and that's how it started.
Well, to convey some of the flavor, we're going to bring up a brief excerpt from the trailer for your documentary.
When they said, "This is the American Revolution," you felt that they meant it.
Don't touch that dial, because there's nothing else on.
We didn't care what the right said. The far right was the establishment. It was the man. It was the pigs. It was all the things that were bad about America. And we were trying to take back America.
This was the 60s. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll was driving the whole thing. And BCN became, in a sense, the engine of that cultural revolt.
For the first time, there was an outlet for music like this on the radio. This was music of substance. These were artists of interest. These were artists who displayed their roots and their influences.
Hello, Bruce Springsteen.
We're on the air?
Yeah, we're on the air.
Hey! All right. And this is my very first time on radio, and I want to say hello to my mother who lives in California. Hi, Mom.
Bill, some of that commentary sounded very heady. If you had to explain to someone growing up now, a kid in high school, why this was such a big deal back around 1968 to 1970, what would you tell them?
I would say that because before the internet, before Facebook, before cell phones, there really were not a constant, ongoing means for people to communicate, to hear new music, etc. And this was almost a singular source in Boston for 240,000 college kids and people in the city generally to get news and information about what was going on at probably one of the most transformative periods in American history.
Now, there have been a lot of anthems written about the power of rock and roll and the counterculture, but this seems to be almost like the quintessence of it. Why did that happen in Boston maybe more than other cities?
I think, two reasons. One was largely because there were so many college students here at a time when young people were being drafted to go off and fight in Vietnam, and that sort of revved the whole thing up. And the baby boomer generation was really coming into its own culturally. And this effort to find a different way, really, of living your life than what had preceded it, the 1950s and kind of Ozzie and Harriet, American lifestyle. And at the same time, it was really the brilliance of this entrepreneur, Ray Repin, who had the trifecta of opening a dance hall called the Boston Tea Party, where a lot of these bands were first heard, the radio station, and then he started the Phoenix, which was an underground paper here. And I think all of that together just became a very powerful force.
One of the things that rang strongly with me when I looked at the trailer was somebody mentioning this is a station that had music of substance. I felt that even when I was a teenager, and I'm realizing this is the transition from singles and jukeboxes to albums, people with their own stereos, and a different attention span. Isn't that part of the story here too?
Yeah, before WBCN, and there were a few other stations that were at least playing album cuts on FM. Top 40 radio was really the only way to hear rock and roll. And Top 40 was called Top 40. It was on AM because they played the same 40 songs over and over again. Most of them were 2.5 minutes long. And suddenly, BCN allowed, and they were largely college radio announcers, to play any kind of music they wanted. So you could hear, almost anything on the air.
Talk about some of the personalities. I mean, the person that stands out more than anybody else for me is Charles Lacudera. I mean, if people have never heard him, explain, what was so special about him?
He came along sort of after the initial wave, but Charles was a very confident, on the air. I mean, I think generally, and this is one of the strengths of the film, everybody who's on the air there were just great personalities, great storytellers. But Charles had a way of sort of incisively getting to the heart of things. I remember there was a Christmas that President Nixon decided on Christmas he was going to bomb Hanoi, the capital of North Vietnam, and mine the harbor, which was against international law at that point. And to make the point of what it would be like, Charles told people to put their speakers out the window on Christmas Day and played an air raid siren for 3 or 4 minutes. And all through Boston, you could hear the sound of this. So he had a very keen sense, I think, of media, how to use media, and to use it in a way that would, bring about social change.
Bill, lots of radio stations have promotional events in the city and the neighborhoods, but there's one thing that you show in this documentary, and that's a huge crowd on Boston Common. It was not, strictly speaking, a BCN promotion. This was a big anti-war demonstration back in 1969. What's the connection to BCN here?
Well, first off, BCN was very involved in mobilizing people for the demonstration. Most of the people at BCN at that point were college students. And as seen in the film, in a short Walter Cronkite news clip from CBS, the organizing of that came out of Boston. Tufts and Brandeis was the national center of it. The idea for the moratorium, it was almost a one-day strike against the war in Vietnam, came out of Boston. And BCN, at the end of it, paid to have an enormous peace sign, sky-written over the city of Boston, that became iconic. It was in the opening, it was in the center spread of Life magazine, and it became an iconic image that BCN, had paid for that. And so really BCN was very involved. It was the largest anti-war demonstration up to that point, I think, in making that day happen.
What's also striking about this station here, it was genuinely alternative, politically edgy, but it was also wildly popular in this city. Convey how much that popularity extended.
Well, initially, there was no real concern about the commercial success of the station. In fact, the station routinely turned down commercials, wouldn't take national ads if a product was seen to be, not consistent with the values of the station. They wouldn't take the ad, and it became even more popular because of that. And then it started to actually make money, and made a lot of money as it went on over the years, and became commercially successful. But during this period that the film focuses on, from 68 to 74, it really tried to remain true to its original roots, which, as Tommy Hadges, who's one of the announcers, says in the film, part of it was that people there were seeing radio not so much as a performance, but as a relationship with listeners. And I think people sensed that you could call the station. Oftentimes people would call the station, and before you knew it, you'd be on the air having a conversation about something, that was on your mind. And it was a very unusual place.
I wonder if you can take me back to when you were there, and I think there was one moment when they were discussing how to reach a younger audience, and you were one of the youngest people in the building, and you said, you people don't know how to do that.
I've never made a film about a family member, but I've talked to people, I know a lot of people have, and they've all said, when you do a film about your family, you find out things that like you never knew. And in a way, this is my family of sorts. I've known these people for 50 years. And in the course of making the film, I found out something that I never knew, which is how I ended up with my own radio show. And apparently it was a meeting where they were talking about how to extend the reach of the station beyond colleges and to really connect better with high school students. And I apparently spoke up and said, this is what you have to do to reach high school students, and impressed Al Perry, who was the general manager at that point. At the end of the meeting, he has told me, he said, we should give him a radio show. And that's how I ended up on the air.
Finally, if people want to check this out, what's the best way to do that?
It's going to be in festivals, and then will be followed by a theatrical release, and then on TV. But the best way to follow it up is we have a website, The American Revolution, which was the tagline for the station in those days, theamericanrevolution.fm. And you can check there, or you can sign up for it. We have a free email newsletter, and we'll keep people in the loop.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.